Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Azad Media session. My name is Zakiya Yazdanshanas, and today I'm the moderator of the session. We're going to talk about the probable deal, the probable agreement between the United States and Iran. And I'm very happy and honored to be joined by two famous and well-known experts in the field of nuclear policy and non-proliferation today. Dr. Nasser Hadian from Tehran and Mr. Robert Einhorn from Washington. Let me first start by introducing our guests to you. Mr. Einhorn, Robert Einhorn, is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a leading think tank in Washington, D.C. Mr. Einhorn served for 37 years in the U.S. State Department, including as Assistant Secretary for Non-Proliferation in Bill Clinton administration and the Secretary of State's Special Advisor for Non-Proliferation and Arms Control in the Barack Obama administration. Einhorn was a member of the U.S. delegation to the P5+1 talk with Iran from 2009 till 2013. And now let me introduce Mr. Nasser Hadian. Nasser Hadian is a professor of political science at the University of Tehran, where he has served as the director of graduate studies. Dr. Hadian was the director of the Political Development Program at the Center for Strategic Research think tank in Tehran, and he also was a visiting professor and research scholar at the Middle East Institute and the Department of Middle East and Asian Languages and Cultures at Columbia University. Dr. Hadian has also been involved for decades in the track to diplomacy as a representative of Iran. Gentlemen, thank you for accepting our invitation, and it's really an honor and pleasure to have you both here. For the first question and for starting the session, I'm going to ask the first question from Mr. Einhorn, and then with the same question, I will go back to Dr. Hadian. For the first question, Mr. Einhorn, what is your perception of the current state of the relationship between the United States and Iran, and how seriously do you view the prospect of further sanctions on Iran, or even the possible military conflict between two sides?
First of all, let me send my thanks to the Assad Institution for inviting me to this event. Thank you for your kind introduction. It's an especial privilege to be on the same program as Nasser Hadian, a renowned expert on these issues and someone I have dealt with for many, many years. So thanks for all of that. As to your question, clearly U.S.-Iranian relations are currently in a very adversarial, even confrontational mode. The Trump administration is imposing maximum economic pressure on Iran and threatening to use military force if a new agreement is not reached. For its part, Iran is pledging to retaliate with great destructive force against American interests, bases, and partners. And I think these threats should be taken very seriously. But I believe the best way to ensure that these threats are not carried out is to reach a new agreement. Hopefully, the initial meetings that were held in Oman, the meeting that is scheduled, I believe, to take place this weekend in Rome, will get the two countries off to a good start towards such an agreement.
Okay, thank you. And what do you think about the probable situation between Iran and the United States?
I wish also to thank Azad Media and institution for inviting me. to share some of the ideas with the audience. Also, it is really, really an honor and pleasure to be in the same panel with Bob Einhorn, whom I know for rather now decades. One of the most important scholars of the nuclear issue is certainly Bob, and all of us have benefited from his insights on this issue. But regarding the question, as Bob said, I think now the situation is very tense. But it is a constructed intensity, which unfortunately exists between both countries now. But I guess what we had last Saturday in Muscat, Oman, was a good starting point. And I guess, of course, it was supposed to be in Rome, but Bob, it's now again back to Oman. We are going to have the meeting again in Oman for the next time. But anyway, I heard from reliable sources that the first meeting was a very good one. And I guess it is going to continue. I'm indeed hopeful that they can agree. Particularly Steve Witkoff, the special envoy of the President Trump, to me has been a very good choice. He has been well received in Tehran. He has been in front pages of many newspapers, that he's a pragmatic individual, he's a deal maker, and he's very close to President Trump. Thus, the possibility of an agreement, a final agreement, is more. Although I guess now they have agreed to concentrate only on nuclear issue, and I know that's exactly what Iran wants, but that's what I don't think it is going to be useful. I wish, and I push for it inside Iran, that we have a comprehensive agenda to engage with the US. And that would serve our interests better and US interests better and everyone's interests better if we address all the issues of concern for both sides. Yeah.
For the next question, let's a little dive into the situation in the Middle East. Considering all the regional developments that we have witnessed in the recent couple of years, do you think an agreement between the two sides would be feasible? And if so, what elements such a deal should include, and how it should be actually implemented? Should it be implemented through different phases, do you think, Mr. Einhorn, please?
Thank you. That's a very good question. There are many obstacles to reaching agreement. Nasser knows this very well, how difficult it can be. Not the least of these obstacles is hardline opposition to a deal. Both in Washington and in Tehran. We could go into this in detail if you'd like, but there's no question that there are those in Washington who would like to see a deal. I think foremost among them is President Trump and Steve Witkoff. But there are also voices in Washington that remain opposed. But we could go into that later. But despite these internal differences in both capitals, I think a new deal is attainable. And I think it's attainable mainly because I believe both sides have incentives for reaching a deal. For the United States, the Trump administration wants to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons. I think the Trump administration also wants to avoid a regional armed conflict that could involve the United States and could divert the Trump administration from what it considers to be higher foreign policy priorities, including, for example, coping with the China threat. I think Iran's leaders also have incentives for reaching a deal. They believe that the sanctions relief that could be provided in a new agreement would help overcome Iran's current economic difficulties. I think Iran's leaders also wish to avoid a destructive and costly regional armed conflict that would not only destabilize the region, but could also have possible implications for the stability of the regime. You asked, from a U.S. perspective, what basic measures, what key elements would a new agreement have? I think from a U.S. perspective, I believe a new deal should include constraints on Iran's enrichment program that significantly increase the length of time it would take Iran to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a single nuclear weapon. I think, as I'm sure your audience knows, the significant increases in Iran's enrichment program mean that it would take only a week or so, maybe just a matter of days, before Iran could produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a single nuclear weapon. I think equally important, a deal should restore the monitoring and transparency measures that were included in the JCPOA. I think the restoration of these measures would give the international community confidence that Iran's nuclear program was devoted exclusively to peaceful purposes. Over the last couple of years, Iran, step by step, has reduced the access of the International Atomic Energy Agency to Iran's nuclear program. And over time, that means that the IAEA no longer has a complete picture of Iran's program. I think a restored, a new nuclear agreement should address that problem. I also believe that, in my own view, a new deal should address regional issues in some fashion, and particularly it should address Iran's transfer of arms and associated equipment and technology to non-state actors in the region. In my view, such regional issues should not be included in a nuclear agreement. I think trying to include them in a nuclear agreement would only complicate and prolong negotiations. But I think those regional issues, especially the transfer of arms, could be dealt with in some separate manner. And of course, a new agreement should contain incentives for Iran, including sanctions relief. But I'll leave that part of the equation to Nasser.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you. Please go ahead, Dr. Hadian.
okay. I would like to address the regional issue and the missile issue separately. I would like to concentrate now only on nuclear issue. Thanks to Bob, there is a structure there called JCPOA. It has 3 parts, which I guess it was articulated by Bob himself. And these 3 concepts is the orienting principle, particularly for the Americans, to organize the JCPOA. One is the detection, breakout, deterrence. These are the 3 concepts, Bob, which, if I'm not mistaken, you yourself basically constructed and developed. By detection, what you meant was basically all these verification systems, inspection regimes, managed access, and snap inspections, so forth and so on. I guess that can be done. I'm very hopeful there is not that much difference. We still can use the same mechanism. In fact, even increase a couple of more managed access, a couple of more snap inspections. We can include in the New Deal those stuff. Thus, there should not be all that much difference regarding the detection part. But regarding the breakout time, I guess that has changed. And I would like to ask a question from you, how we can reinstitute it. The breakout time is subject to 4 factors: type of centrifuges, number of centrifuges, purity of the enriched uranium, and a stockpile of the enriched uranium. These are the 4 factors which basically shape the breakout. So I guess we need a different formula now in order to have that so-called 1-year breakout capability, to have enough material for making the so-called bomb. But that's, to me, Bob, impossible to have 1 year. I guess in the best of circumstances, which I thought I could imagine, is 6-7 months. Okay, not a year. Imagine that we change the number of centrifuges of a more advanced one to 6-7 more advanced centrifuges, cascade of new centrifuges. And we get rid of all the other centrifuges. Number 2 is we again enrich uranium below 5%. In other words, a 3.67%. The stockpile can be further lowered from 300 kilograms, for instance, to 200 kilograms. So the combination of these factors can lead to 7 months, 6 months, 8 months of breakout. So that's about the breakout. And then about the deterrence. This is, I'm looking at the issue from the American side. And then there is a deterrence part. Doing something, passing some laws in the UN Security Council or in the US Congress, so forth and so on, in order to deter Iran of cheating. But from our side, what is important, if we are giving these, we don't want to see the same thing happens, Bob. We don't want to see the next president come and withdraw from the JCPOA again. What can be done in order to stop the next US president taking the same action? As a result of what President Trump did, we suffered about $240 billion, which I asked the vice president to basically tell me that the data, the statistics regarding the cost which we have paid. So we don't want to see the same thing happen again. So I have proposed personally that keeping the enriched uranium, the extras of 60%, 20%, 5%, whatever, to store them in Iran, but sealed and controlled by the IAEA for the deterrence effect, deterring the next US president to do the same thing at will. So then, if we are going to do, if the US is going to adopt that, what else we can give US to incentivize the US to agree with it? Because we were observing our part of the commitment, and it was President Trump, due to domestic politics of US, unraveling whatever President Obama has done, withdraw from the JCPOA. We don't want to see the same thing happen again. So my suggestion have been, add some years to the sunset clauses, give them more snap inspection, give them more managed access, lower the amount of enriched uranium which we are supposed to have under the JCPOA. So these should be the main elements of the New Deal with the JCPOA, with the US. So that has been my suggestion, that we have to include these in order to have a deal.
If I'm getting it correctly, both of you believe that in the first phase, it's better to concentrate on making a nuclear deal, with the exception that Mr. Einhorn added that it's better to add some regional negotiations too, especially in the era of transferring of arms. But in the first phase, I think that both sides need some measurements to need some confidence building measurements. And do you think, both of you, do you think a kind of a short-term deal would actually pave the way, would actually help both sides to trust each other? And if so, what are the key arrangements? What are the key conditions for such a short-term deal? Mr. Einhorn, please go ahead.
Yeah. There are a number of factors that are putting pressures on the negotiators for an early agreement. There's Trump's talk about a 60-day deadline. There's the expiration of the so-called snapback mechanism in October. There's concern in the United States that Iran is moving very close to the nuclear weapons threshold. So there's pressure on negotiators to get a deal. But it's simply not going to be possible for negotiators to produce a comprehensive deal in a matter of months. As you mentioned, there is a lot of mutual mistrust at the present time between the United States and Iran. I think by moving in phases, in stages, it may be possible over time to reduce that mutual mistrust and to provide the negotiators the confidence to continue proceeding. I noticed that Foreign Minister Araghchi has talked about an interim deal, a kind of first phase arrangement. I think that's a very productive idea. I don't know what the Trump administration's attitude would be toward an interim deal. Presumably, they're thinking about it, but it could be devoted to some limited measures that could, build mutual trust and provide confidence on both sides that it's in their interest to continue negotiations to a more comprehensive deal. And I think it would be possible to achieve an interim deal in a matter of just a few months.
Okay.
And if I could just add, Nasser, if you could speak a little louder or into the microphone, I'm really having difficulty following what you're saying. I know it's profound. I could tell it's profound. But I can't get all the detail unless you speak a little louder. And thank you very much. I'm sorry to ask that.
Please
okay, I'll try to talk louder. But if I don't know to what extent you heard what I said, which I guess I wish to know your ideas about them. But regarding the next question, I fully agree with you that it's better, I have 3 phases. The first phase, we have a freeze. Okay, freeze basically means we freeze whatever we are doing, both sides. And then we have a temporary agreement, like the JPOA, which we had. And the third one would be the full agreement. So that would build confidence as well. But in the final agreement also, the problem for us in the first one, the JCPOA, was basically we gave whatever we were supposed to give, but what we got in return was not equivalent of to what we got. In other words, this time should be more reciprocal. We give this much, and we get that much, and then we go to the next part of it. So in other words, thus we have three phases: freeze for freeze, temporary agreement, full agreement. In the full agreement, then we have phase and phase, or possibly 2-3 phases in the full agreement. So I wish to know if you heard what I said regarding, the main elements of the full agreement, which include keeping the uranium inside Iran, sealed and controlled by the IAEA, but also we will give, add some years to the sunset clauses, reduce the enriched uranium from 300 kilograms to 200, give more snap inspection, give more managed access, more inspectors inside Iran, more cameras, if that would be acceptable for the US.
Maybe I could just respond. First of all, on the phases, Nasser talks about 3 phases: a freeze, then some limited measures, then comprehensive deal. And with the comprehensive deal itself could be implemented in phases. The freeze idea, the problem with the freeze idea, it seems to me, is I wonder whether it's politically acceptable in the United States. The current situation is not very acceptable, at least from a Washington perspective, with Iran potentially a few days from having a nuclear weapon. I would think the first phase, the interim deal, I think would have to involve some movement away from that nuclear threshold, with some constraints on enrichment capacity and with some increases in monitoring and transparency, not all the way to restoring the JCPOA's monitoring arrangements, but to restore some of the lost IAEA access and so forth. So what I'm saying is a freeze may be too little. President Trump, if he negotiated an initial phase, he would have to sell that to the American public. And I think it would be easier sale for him if he could show some modest rollback. I think that would be necessary. But then, as Nasser said, to proceed to a full agreement. Now, I understand that Iran perceives that the JCPOA was imbalanced in terms of the way it was implemented, with Iran proceeding to reduce very substantially its uranium enrichment capacity, and the United States to pursue some limited sanctions relief measures that were then reversed. And I understand that Iran would like some assurances. I think Iran calls them guarantees that a future U.S. administration would not withdraw from any agreement and reimpose sanctions. It wants some security. Iran wants to create disincentives for the United States to do that in the future. One way of doing that is to retain some enriched uranium stockpile under very tight supervision within Iran, if I understand Nasser's approach correctly. And that would serve the ability of Iran to then draw on that stockpile to strengthen its enrichment capacity, would serve as a kind of deterrent to a future administration to withdraw. It's an interesting idea. I would prefer other ways of providing disincentives, and I think I'll come to that later in our discussion.
Okay. Mr. Einhorn, a quick question. While you were talking about a temporary deal, what measures do you propose? Do you think, for example, Iran should decrease the level of enrichment or should downblend some of its enriched stockpile? What's your exact suggestion for the short-term deal?
Are you talking about for an interim deal, or are you talking about in the basic comprehensive deal?
For the short-term deal.
Interim.
I'm
For the interim deal.
Oh, okay. So for the interim deal, I would some modest measures, but as I suggested, politically for the U.S., it would have to involve some additional constraints. Additional to what exists today. So maybe it's not only a freeze, no more enrichment of uranium to the 60% level. Maybe there would be some small level of either diluting that part of that 60% down to 20%, or some. Or maybe it would involve a freeze on the installation of advanced centrifuges. I think very important in an interim agreement is to restore some of the IAEA's access to the enrichment sites. It could involve the restoration of online enrichment monitoring, some improvement in the frequency of IAEA inspectors to sensitive locations. I don't know. This is up for the negotiators, but I think there needs to be some actual restrictions reimposed as part of an interim deal.
Okay. Dr. Hadian, a quick question for you. What do you think Iran can get in return, according to what Einhorn said?
I guess let me say a sentence and then answer your question. Bob, I think a part of what you said is totally acceptable. The verification part, in other words, accepting more restriction, accepting rather more intrusive measures for verification is acceptable. It's doable, but reducing the capabilities, it needs something in return. Okay, that needs something in return. Of course, the freeze to be frank with you, I propose it more for President Trump, that he can claim that, okay, I froze Iranian nuclear program, and then it give them a couple of months to work for the temporary agreement, and then the full agreement. There is a time for the full agreement. But if you think it is possible to have a temporary agreement, interim agreement, right away, I guess Iran would agree with it. Iran would agree with it on the basis of what you said. A major part of it is on verification system, more inspections, more monitoring, more even snap inspections. Iran would agree with it, but reducing the 60% and 20%, we need something real to get in return, not symbolic. If that is possible, in a short term, I guess Iran would agree with it. But regarding what we want, certainly it's in the area of the sanctions. For instance, being able to sell oil like the JCPOA, 700,000 to 1 million barrels of oil a day. And also being able to get our monies, basically which are in Qatar, in China, and other places. So we can get it in return. We can get it back. And these are going to be the type of things which we are going to ask for more intrusive inspections and constraints on our enriched uranium and centrifuges.
I would, let me say that I agree with that. I mean, Iran is not going to agree to concrete reductions in capability without getting something in return. I fully appreciate that. And I think, Nasser, you just mentioned two steps that could be taken even in an interim deal. One step would be to unfreeze Iranian assets currently held in various overseas accounts. There's a lot of money. These are Iranian oil revenues that have been frozen. I think releasing all or a substantial amount of those frozen accounts would be one step that could be taken. Another one would be a relaxation in the U.S. Oil sanction, the sanction against countries and entities that import Iranian crude oil. I think the U.S. could waive portions of that sanctions to permit a substantial increase in Iranian oil exports, which would be a source of important revenue. I think those kind of steps, even in the absence of major across-the-board sanctions relief, would be useful and would justify Iran's acceptance of some limited restrictions on its enrichment program and some restoration of IAEA monitoring. So I think we seem to be in agreement on that.
Yes, totally.
Okay. Another question about the possible short-term deal. Do you think the option of extending the expiration date of the snapback mechanism would be a viable option in a temporary deal? Mr. Einhorn, you go first.
Yes, I do think it would be a useful component. The Europeans especially believe that the prospect of snapback is an inducement for Iran to come to an agreement. I don't know how valid that assessment is. Nasser might comment on it, but in any event, it's seen as providing useful leverage, at least from a European perspective. I frankly have my doubts about that, but I think if an interim deal simply extended the period in which snapback could be implemented beyond October, it might be a useful component in the deal. For me, not a major component, but it could be a useful component to answer your question.
Okay, and what do you think?
Yeah, Bob, I'm a little bit worried about the European, because I guess both Trump administration and Iran want to exclude the Europeans. And I guess that's not a very constructive approach. Because if Europeans are not a part of the game, then they think that the only card they have is the snapback. Because if the snapbacks go away, then they are not going to be a player anymore. They think that, Iran and the US would make the deal and they would exclude both of them. Thus, we have to have a very active diplomacy, both to have the European on board, and in fact, even Chinese and the Russians. They all have to be. It just cannot be a deal between Iran and the US. We have to include the others. And certainly, of course, the US would say that we take into consideration the European concerns. If you listen to what French foreign minister said yesterday, they said that our concerns should be taken into consideration in any talk between Iran and the US. So that's why this is very much a personal view. I think we need to include all of them. And number two is to postpone the deadline from October for another 6 months in order to give us time to finalize a deal. Because you have been a part of the negotiation, I know that it is not easy to finalize such a deal. And I would like to address some issues regarding the region and the missiles, but I would wait for your question.
Please go ahead. You can add whatever point you have here.
But that's a whole new basically area that we need to address.
Okay.
I prefer to wait and then address the regional issue.
Okay.
Because that should be, in fact, that should be 2-3 questions.
We will address that further. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the experience of JCPOA. And this question is addressed to both of you. Do you think JCPOA, the experience of JCPOA, can serve as a blueprint for the possible potential deal between Iran and the United States? And in general, what do you think the shortcomings of the JCPOA are that led that deal to the failure? And what do you think the objectives of the new deal should be? How they should be different from the objectives that were defined in the JCPOA? Mr. Einhorn, you go first.
Is the JCPOA a blueprint? I wouldn't use that term. There's no going back to the JCPOA. Some of its provisions are no longer applicable. I'll give you an example. The JCPOA imposed very tight restrictions on research and development for centrifuges. In the last few years, Iran has developed, tested, installed, and is operating advanced centrifuges. So it makes no sense, to restore that. And I can go over many of the elements of the JCPOA that would not be applicable. But many of the basic concepts and approaches in the JCPOA could be built upon in a new comprehensive agreement. Dealing with enrichment capacity through limits on numbers and types of centrifuges, on enrichment level, on stockpiling, these kinds of concepts would be applicable, I think. But the numerical values you might attach to those concepts, I think, would have to be different in an agreement, in a new agreement. I don't know if Nasser agrees with that.
Yes, I fully agree with you. But again, I fully agree with you. And I guess JCPOA can be useful in regard to there is a structure there. They know that, for instance, how to use the structure. And that would be very helpful. Just imagine that if we are going to talk about, for instance, regional issue, there is not a structure there. But for the nuclear issue, there is a structure. And that's very important because we know that, for instance, we are going to talk about the number of centrifuges, the type of centrifuges, the level of enrichment, the stockpile of the enrichment, and also sanctions. There is a lot of details about the sanctions. We can use all those things. So yes, we can build upon it, we can improve it, but particularly regarding a couple of issues which are very important for Iran. And that's like a verification system about the other side. We have adopted a verification system about our commitments. IAEA can verify if we are observing our commitments, but there is not such a mechanism on the other side if the other side is observing its commitment. So we need to include that in any basically agreement. So these are the type of things which we have to build on and up regarding the JCPOA. So it is helpful. It is very different from regional issue because the infrastructure is there for the agreement, but it is not enough. We need to improve it.
No, I agree. I agree with that. I think you asked what the shortcomings. Why did the JCPOA fail? What are its shortcomings? I think each side will have a different answer to that question of the shortcomings of the JCPOA. I'll give you the U.S. perspective, and I'll give you the perspective actually of the critics of the JCPOA in the United States, and they believe there were several shortcomings. One was that the restrictions on the Iranian enrichment program were of limited duration. The critics say they should be permanent. Another shortcoming identified by the critics was that the JCPOA did not ban enrichment altogether. It allowed Iran to have an enrichment program. A third criticism was that the JCPOA failed to address regional issues as well as Iran's missile capability. And a fourth criticism was that its sanctions relief was too generous. It allowed Iran to devote these resources, these additional resources, to what the critics considered to be Iran's destabilizing activities in the region. These were their main criticisms. And I think, the critics will continue to have such criticisms. And those criticisms will affect the negotiating position of the Trump administration. But I think President Trump and Steve Witkoff, his envoy for these negotiations, perhaps have a more flexible attitude. They will try to address what the critics consider shortcomings, but I think they'll try to do that in a more pragmatic way.
Okay. Do you have anything to add?
Yes, but Bob, we have those kind of critics in Iran too. That's why we should limit the rights, our right of enrichment, our right of the centrifuges, why there should be inspectors, so forth and so on, why we have to accept the additional protocol. So, but I'm not talking about this hardline position, but I'm talking about the middle ground, which think rationally, like yourself, and like those who negotiated, basically. So I guess we have, although we should not dismiss them altogether, but we should concentrate on what is in practice possible, what is doable, what is achievable. Otherwise, if we leave it to these hardliners of both sides, we are not going to have an agreement at all. So,
can I say how I would conceptualize an approach that hopefully could achieve agreement, not just between the United States and Iran, but others in the region, Russia, China, the Europeans, they could all be on board. My own view is that a new agreement does not need to prohibit all enrichment activities in Iran. I think there are those in America who call for zero enrichment. I recognize, having worked with Iranians on this issue for many years, that this is a non-starter. I think the way to conceptualize a new approach is to allow and even encourage Iran to pursue a modern, effective civil nuclear program. To say that that's okay, even to be encouraged, but at the same time to adopt various restrictions and monitoring arrangements to provide confidence to the international community that this modern civil nuclear program is devoted exclusively to peaceful purposes. So that I would put that up as a model. And the kind of approach I would envisage for a new comprehensive nuclear deal would differ from the JCPOA in some important respects. And let me mention a few of the respects. It would allow Iran to have greater enrichment capacity than the JPOA, considerably more, with a shorter breakout time. than the 12 months that the JCPOA ensured. Nasser mentioned 6, 7, 8 months, something like that. It seems to me a shorter breakout time should be acceptable, and that means a more significant Iranian enrichment capacity. As I mentioned before, I think a second different feature is that a new agreement should be supportive of a civil nuclear program in a number of ways. It could, among the incentives for Iran, support civil nuclear cooperation for elements of the Iranian civil program that don't have significant implications for a weapons program. I think the monitoring arrangements could even be, and the transparency arrangements could be even more robust than under the JCPOA. And I think to compensate Iran for this, that it would be important for the JCPOA to provide more reliable and durable economic benefits. So it would be different. The new agreement would be different from the JCPOA in important respects. But I think it would provide mutual benefits to both sides.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question regarding the experience of the JCPOA and the lessons we can learn from our past experience, and then we can move forward to the another question. Mr. Einhorn, what do you think about the possibility of making some guarantee for the upcoming deal to last in Washington? How we can guarantee that the new deal would last in Washington and the next president would not withdraw from the deal?
Well, this is a good question and a very difficult question. It's as Iranian negotiators involved in negotiations with the American side have heard many times from the American side, there is no legal way to prevent a future U.S. administration from withdrawing from the agreement and reimposing sanctions. But I think especially in current circumstances, it should be possible to make a new agreement together with its sanctions relief and other economic benefits more durable. It's a political fact of life that a new deal concluded with President Trump and supported by Republicans in the Congress and by Republican voters around the country will be more durable than any agreement negotiated by Democratic presidents like Obama and Biden. An agreement approved by 2/3 of the Senate of the U.S. Senate as a treaty, which under our system becomes the law of the land, should be more durable than a political commitment like the JCPOA, which was not approved by the U.S. Congress and was not legally binding on U.S. administrations. In my view, the current Senate would approve by at least 2/3 vote a treaty submitted by President Trump, because all or at least most Republican senators would go along with that treaty, and I think many Democrats who would support a new nuclear deal would have no choice but to support this agreement. So I think the 2/3 threshold is easily surmountable, and this would enhance the durability of the deal. Now, of course, it's possible any deal would have withdrawal provisions, and you can't, even a treaty has withdrawal provisions. So it's not totally irreversible. But I think a treaty would give more confidence that this arrangement would last. Now, there's a novel approach that is emerging to making a new agreement more durable, giving American firms and investors an economic stake in the continued operation of a new agreement is another way to promote its sustainability. Allowing U.S. businessmen to trade, invest, and operate in Iran could give them such a stake. And it was interesting to read Foreign Minister Araghchi's op-ed in the Washington Post recently. In it, he appealed to President Trump as a businessman and a deal maker. Foreign Minister Araghchi said, it's not Iran that keeps American enterprises away from the $1 trillion opportunity that access to the Iranian economy brings. It's American sanctions that do that. Now, as Nasser knows very well, American administrations so far have been unwilling to eliminate the so-called primary sanctions that bar Americans for doing business with Iran. But who knows with President Trump? And I think if American companies develop a genuine economic stake in the sustainability of an agreement, I think that would be very useful, and at least a partial answer, a new answer to the question about how to make a deal more sustainable.
Okay. Anything you would like to add?
Yes, I have two questions, but also a comment. Bob, I guess, like you, I don't believe that the legal issues can address our concern. In other words, even if it is a treaty, there is always room for withdrawing, so that's not going to help us that much. But what can help us is exactly what I said, keeping the extra uranium inside Iran, sealed and controlled, supervised with the supervisions of IAEA. That would deter the next US president much more than a treaty. And number two is, as you mentioned, far more important factor is economic investment inside Iran. But for doing that, you need to change the primary laws, the primary sanctions. But two questions now. Do we need 50 plus one vote to change the primary sanctions laws? And also for treaty, I guess we need 60 votes rather than 2/3.
Actually, 67.
67? That 2/3 you mean?
2/3. 2/3.
Okay, so that's 2/3. You are sure about it? You are sure about the 2/3?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's in the U.S.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments?
No, but my suggestion would be give us a break for 5 minutes and then we come back for the region.
Mr. Einhorn, for this part, I'm going to ask you about the details that you have in your mind. As we all know, the US seeks to prevent and to deter Iran from acquiring and providing nuclear weapons, and has previously relied on two key tools, which were, the first one was monitoring, safeguards, and verification measures. And the second one was, of course, extending the breakout timeline, as you mentioned. And to prolong the breakout timeline, the JCPOA imposed strict restrictions on Iranian enrichment capability, on its R&D activities, and of course on its plutonium fuel cycle activities. The question is that in the new circumstances, in the new era, what combination of technical and temporal measures would be feasible to ensure the deterrence that US is actually seeking and make the deal possible? What do you think about that?
Well, all negotiations have trade-offs, and the Iranian side, the American side have to deal with trade-offs and their priorities in what they seek in negotiations. In the original JCPOA negotiations, the U.S. had to make a trade-off between limits on Iran's enrichment capacity and the duration of those limits. Now, the Obama administration placed a high priority on getting strict limits on Iran's enrichment capacity. And to get those strict limits, it was prepared to accept limitations on the duration of the agreement, which Iran supported. And the U.S. ended up accepting these limited durations, sometimes called the sunset provisions, where various restrictions on enrichment expired at various dates. So the trade-off between limits on enrichment and duration was settled in the U.S. view on the basis of higher priority to strict limits. I think in a new agreement, those priorities should be reversed. I think it's more important that the duration of any measures be permanent, or at the very least, very long term. I think it is important to provide predictability, to provide businessmen with some certainty about the long-term environment, to provide predictability from a security perspective. So I think the priority should be reversed. And the U.S. should be able to sacrifice some strict limits on enrichment to get an agreement that is permanent. And so what does that mean in practice? It means that there's no expectation, in my view, that an agreement could provide 12 months of breakout time. In my view, it doesn't even have to provide 6 or 7 months. It could be shorter than that. And if the agreements are genuinely long-lasting, even permanent. There's another kind of trade-off between strict limits on enrichment and strict monitoring arrangements. In my view, it's more important that the agreement provide for very rigorous IAEA monitoring, even more rigorous than in the JCPOA. More important that agreement do that than it provide 12 months or 6 months or 5 months of breakout time. I think those are the trade-offs that have to be made, and I think the trade-offs should be made differently in a new agreement than in the JCPOA.
Okay.
I
Please
guess
go
what
ahead.
Bob said, that's a very interesting idea which you are proposing. But I guess it is doable, provided that we have some sort of a guarantees that they are going to last long. In other words, restrictor verification system, fine. I guess Iran at the end of the day would agree with it, because we don't want to bomb. Thus, if you are check it that we don't cheat, fine. But limiting and constraining the capabilities is more problematic. But I guess along the line which you are proposing, maybe can be contemplated on and discussed inside Iran. But these are all provided that we keep the enriched uranium inside Iran under the supervision of the IAEA, sealed and controlled, just only for deterrence. But also the money, also the economic incentives are important. We can find some sort of a compromise if there is enough investment inside Iran that give us a confidence that the next US president is not going to withdraw from the JCPOA. In other words, Bob, we are really worried that President Trump or someone else say, okay, I'm ready to give you these, but get rid of the extra enriched uranium you have. Okay. And then once they get rid of these things, withdraw again. So that's a real, genuine, important question in our minds here, that they cannot withdraw back again. And legal arguments, legal documents, treaties are helpful, but not fundamentally. US economic presence in Iran, or then keeping the enriched uranium inside Iran, these are far more important tools in our hand.
Okay, so you're saying that keeping the enriched stockpile in Iran is actually guaranteeing the reversibility Iran is acquiring.
Exactly.
Okay, what do you think about that? Sorry, please. Mr. Einhorn, go ahead.
It's an interesting idea. I would have to think about that. The reality is, of course, Nasser, that as long as Iran retains a significant enrichment capacity, and what I'm suggesting, by the way, is a limit on enrichment level at 20%, not 3.6%, which was in the JCPOA, but higher even, because the Tehran research reactor gets fueled at around 19.75%, and the new small modular reactors that are being developed all over the world, they require about 20%. So I would limit enrichment to 20%. I wouldn't say that Iran has to get rid of its advanced centrifuges, the IR6s and so forth. It could retain those, or there might be limits on that. But Iran would have the right to produce fuel for its nuclear reactors, whether those supplied by Russia or indigenously produced. I'm talking about a substantial enrichment program. I think that itself would provide the basis for any Iranian so-called breakout. If Iran at some future date concluded that a U.S. administration was reneging on its commitments, it would have there a substantial enrichment capacity that it could then ramp up again, as it's done over the last few years. So I don't know that you really need some stockpile of enriched uranium under tight IAEA control. I think having a fairly robust civil nuclear energy program along the lines I'm suggesting would give Iran the capacity to ramp up the program if it needed to do that in the future. Of course, all of this would be subject to negotiation. But I take it from your comments, Nasser, and from the op-ed that Abbas Araghchi did in the Washington Post, that sustainability of a deal, of guarantees about the durability of U.S. sanctions relief and other economic benefits, those are going to be critical issues for Iran in any negotiation. I get that. And I think American negotiators need to be sensitive to that. I know I keep referring to the op-ed, but this is an authoritative statement of Iranian views, and in it, Abbas Araghchi mentioned twice, not once but twice, this sustainability issue. So I understand this is going to be front and center in upcoming negotiations.
Yeah, I mean, what you propose also is very interesting, Bob. I'm going to discuss that with Salehi, which I'm going to meet him next week. What about if we have capability of enriching at 20% and having more advanced centrifuges rather than keeping the stockpile of the extra enriched uranium which we have in Iran? That may be a good suggestion. But I should ask that from Ali Akbar Salehi, who was the director of our Iranian Atomic Energy Organization. He's well qualified. He has been a part of the negotiation. He understands the issue well. I would ask him, but that's a very good suggestion.
Do you have any other suggestions regarding guaranteeing the symmetrical reversibility for Iran that you would like to add to your previous suggestion?
Yeah, as I said these are the elements. The first, what Bob said, I'm going to check on that one, which is a good idea. I have to check on it, which is if it is doable or not. Number two is the economic incentive. They have the investments, U.S. investment in Iran. And number three is it should be reciprocal phases in a final agreement. Reciprocal phases that we are sure we are getting the benefits which we are going to get. And if we can add, which I'm sure we can, having a verification system for the other side. In other words, having 15 individual, very high-level individual in the board to form a committee that if we have a complaint about whether we have received our benefits or not, they can verify that if the other side have delivered on their part. So these are the type of things. We don't want anything extra. What we want is just to make sure we are getting what we are supposed to get.
Yeah. Anything you would like to add? Any comments?
No, only it's clear that Iran is not going to enter a new deal without some guarantee that it's going to get what it's negotiated to get. That's kind of axiomatic in any negotiation. The devil, of course, is always in the details. And I think negotiators will have to spend a lot of time on this problem.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the sanction relief and all the economic interests and economic benefits that Iran is actually seeking. And the question is addressed to both of you. And what scope of sanctions removal or suspension do you consider as achievable? Mr. Einhorn, you go first.
Well, I mentioned in our discussion of an interim deal, the kinds of sanctions relief measures would be appropriate. And I referred to the unfreezing of certain overseas Iranian assets that are being held up. I think the unfreezing of those assets, or a large part of them, would provide substantial economic benefit. Another element was the partial waiver of America's sanctions on the import of Iranian crude oil, and this could permit the Iran's export of several 100,000 barrels a day, an additional 100,000, several 100,000 barrels a day, that would increase revenues from Iranian oil exports. So those, I think, would be appropriate for an interim deal. They would not touch the larger sanctions regime, but for an interim measure would be appropriate. Now, what sanctions relief, what other economic benefits would be appropriate for a comprehensive deal? I think there's a blank slate on that to be filled out. And I think from a U.S. perspective, the more the restrictions, the more the monitoring and all that, the more the sanctions relief. But at the high end of sanctions relief, of course, would be the elimination or partial elimination of primary U.S. sanctions that prohibit Americans from dealing with Iranians, that's been kind of the third rail of American thinking on sanctions relief, not to provide that kind of sanctions relief. But you have a different president in the White House who has been prepared to think outside of the box and consider economic cooperation activities that previous American presidents haven't considered. So one can imagine the possibility of dealing with these U.S. primary sanctions. Whether it's feasible, I just don't know. But I think it's. I think Iranians in the negotiations will have to express their views on sanctions relief, what they want, and how to assure Iran that it will get what's been agreed.
Okay, can I go
You
ahead?
go first. Yeah.
I guess basically it is clear what we want, and that's removal of sanctions, which already exist in the JCPOA. The infrastructure is there. We can add a few or subtract a few. It is already there. Number 2 is investment, and number 3 is free trade. But these are all about dealing with the issue with the waivers and dealing with the secondary sanctions. But I guess what give us the guarantee is they are primary sanctions. For primary sanctions, we need to change some laws in the US. And I fully agree with Bob that President Trump is in a position to change some of those laws that would allow the American investors to invest in Iran, to have a Trump Tower in Iran, to have a Tesla in Iran. So unless they are in Iran, so we cannot be sure that the next US president will not change it. Anyway, primary sanctions this time need to be addressed. So that's regarding the sanctions. But if you permit me, for the next part, I would like to address the regional issue myself first and then Bob.
Okay, please go ahead and talk about your opinion regarding Iranian regional policies. And of course, if you would like, you can talk about missile program and its position in Iranian deterrence doctrine.
In another part.
Please go ahead.
But let's begin with the regional part. I guess, the core of our difference with the US is about regional issues. And I am more optimist about addressing those issues. Although I fully agree with Bob, they should be addressed separately. We should not bring them together because that would take a long, long time to negotiate. We need to address them in a separate platform. But I guess we are closer than ever, almost, now to address those issues. US is somehow concerned about sending weapons to non-state actors. Let's put it this way, about our presence in Lebanon, Syria, and in Palestine. So, Bob, can you continue?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The issue then is Lebanon. I mean, this axis of resistance for all practical purposes is gone. So Hezbollah still is powerful, but it's mostly concerned on domestic politics of Lebanon. Hamas, for all practical purposes, is gone. Syria now is fully, totally out of Iran's control. So that's a major part. Then we have a Houthi, which are important. But I guess Houthis can be addressed within a framework of region between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So that issue can be addressed there with the satisfaction of the US. But then we have the Iraq and Hashd. So by far to us, Iraq is more important, far more important than any other country. It has an inherent value for us. So, but our concerns in Iraq are not fundamentally different. What we want in Iraq is stability, security, and a friendly government. About the security and the stability, security is very clear. Any insecurity in Iraq, which is going to have a trickle-down effect in Iran. So we have to have a stable and secure Iraq. But regarding a friendly government, US may not like it, but we can compromise in a government which is not hostile to us, but not a friend to us or to you. A neutral government. So these are the issues which can be addressed with the satisfaction of both sides. But there is one big problem, and that's Israel. And we know that the power of the Israeli lobby in Washington. We cannot dismiss that. And in fact, the most important impediment now for, if there is a potential impediment, and that's the Israeli lobby, basically to a large extent in the US. But I guess in Iran, what we can agree on is we will support the Palestinian rights, but not necessarily destroying Israel, eliminating Israel from the map. In other words, that would be a very nuanced position, that whatever the Palestinian decide, we will support it. And that means if they agree with if they have any agreement with the Israelis, we are gonna agree with it too. Not Hamas. I'm talking about the Palestinians. So we can somehow, to me, come up with an idea inside Iran that we are going to support the Palestinian rights, but not necessarily that should not be at the expense of destroying the Israelis. And it was a sort of a detente, not a rapprochement with Israel, but a detente with Israel. We are not going to recognize Israel, but we are not going to try to destroy it. We are not recognizing the number of other countries. But that's fine. That's our right not to recognize. I guess that would be a possible future for the region, and that would address all major US concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Einhorn, what do you think about the Iran and the US relationship, considering all the developments in the region, especially in regard to all the points that Dr. Hadian mentioned?
Well, I've listened carefully to Nasser, especially those portions that I could actually hear. And it's a very interesting analysis. And I want to think about some of the issues raised. Clearly, the question of the Middle East region is not something for the United States and Iran to try to resolve by themselves. It's a whole series of issues that require input from the states of the region, from other relevant outside powers, and so forth. So I believe in this essentially bilateral negotiation between the U.S. and Iran, there's only limited things that could be done. And I mentioned one thing that I think would be important is some decision by Iran to discontinue any arms transfer relationship with non-state actors in the region. Nasser mentioned that the Hamas, Hezbollah have both been decimated as military threats. I think that's positive. Mentioned also that there's a new regime in Damascus that poses some obstacles to the transfer of arms and arms technology to non-state actors in Lebanon and in Gaza and the West Bank and so forth. But if it's the case that that these non-state actors have been eliminated as military threats, then why not codify that situation with some kind of a restriction on arms transfers to them? It's clear that past Iranian transfers of missiles, drones, missile production technology, and all the rest of it have been a destabilizing factor. It remains a destabilizing factor with the Houthis, who continue to try to interrupt navigation in the Red Sea. And they do that largely. I know that they produce a lot of their arms indigenously, but it's on the basis of support they have received in the past from Iran. So I think that's a useful measure that could be worked out, this restriction on arms transfer, that could be worked out bilaterally between the U.S. and Iran with some input from other relevant powers. But the broader issues that Nasser raises, I think, will require many countries at the table working things out. I agree with Nasser. There's promise now in some measure of détente between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and in the broader discussions that are taking place now. But I think the kind of arrangements I'm thinking about between the U.S. and Iran could be focused pretty narrowly. And I think the best area of focus would be on the most destabilizing aspect of Iran's participation in the region, which is the transfer of arms and related equipment and technology.
Of course, Bob, what I was talking about is the detente between Iran and Israel, because we cannot dismiss the Israeli issue. We have to address the Israeli issue. And the way I address it, as I mentioned, was basically we can have a sort of a detente with the Israeli, and we can support the Palestinian rights without necessarily destroying the Israelis and eliminating the Israel from the map. So that's what I was talking about, and I think that need to be addressed, and that's very important for President Trump. But fully agree with you that many of these issues should be addressed at the regional level. Okay, particularly about the next issue, which is a missile, which I would address it later. But about the transfer of arms, as I mentioned, if we have these arrangements, if we see what is happening, I guess that would be a non-issue at all. So that would be a prerequisite for any sort of a security arrangement in the region. So that would be a prerequisite not to arm the non-state actors. So that's going to happen. But so far I've been addressing the issues which are concerns of America. But I'm going to address at the end of my talk the Iranian concern, okay, which is one which we discussed is a nuclear issue. The other one is the U.S. military presence in the region, which is threatening to us. So in the comprehensive agreement, there should be a sort of a clauses that how US is going to be present, and under what circumstances US is going to leave the region. Region, I mean Persian Gulf. I'm not talking about, Jordan, Egypt, whatever. Okay, because their presence is threatening to us. How we are going to address that? For instance, incidentality, the presence of US naval forces. So these are the type of things which threatens Iran. Under what circumstances they are ready to leave? Certainly you will say once they feel comfortable, once they feel not threatened by Iran. So fully agree with it. But that's my plan. My plan is a comprehensive engagement with the US, dealing and addressing all the issues of concern to both sides, not just the only nuclear issue, but rather regional issues and the missile issues. And from our side, the US military presence in the region.
Okay. Mr. Einhorn, do you have any comments regarding the possible or probable withdrawal of the US forces from the Persian Gulf?
I'm not talking about, Bob, in 20 years. I'm talking about 10 years, 20 years. I'm not talking about in 5 years or 10 years.
I really have no particular comments about the withdrawal of U.S. forces from the Gulf or from the region. I think from the perspective of a number of countries in the region, traditional friends of the United States, the withdrawal of all U.S. forces would be a destabilizing development. But I think the question of the future U.S. military posture in the region will depend on developments in the region, where the threats are. Now there's been an augmentation of U.S. military capability. Deployments of F-35 fighter aircraft, the deployment of B-2 bombers in Diego Garcia, and a number of other force enhancements. I think those are a reaction to the augmentation of the threat of recent developments in the region. Presumably, this kind of military presence can be increased or decreased, depending on developments in the region. And I think the kind of comprehensive discussions that Nasser envisages, I think, are very positive. Yes, Israel is an important factor, but as long as the destruction and elimination of the Israeli state is an important pillar of Iranian foreign policy, this is a problem for the region, would some entente between Iran and Israel be a good thing? Sure, but how you achieve that, I'm not so sure. But I think an initial step would be to dial back some of the extremely hostile rhetoric you hear from Iranians about the Israeli state.
Okay.
That's a very good suggestion, Bob, that we reduce the level of rhetorics from both sides, or at least at the foreign minister level first, and the prime minister or president then, further down. But that's a very good suggestion, basically, for beginning of this process.
Okay, thank you. Would you, Dr. Hadian, share with us your opinion regarding the Iran's missile capabilities and how you can relate that to the nuclear dossier and how it actually is related to Iranian deterrence?
Okay, it should not be associated with the negotiation again, with the nuclear negotiation. It should be a separate issue. But missiles are basically conventional weapons. Thus, it should be discussed within a framework of conventional arms negotiation. We are strong, for instance, in missiles and on drones. Israelis and, for instance, Saudis are strong in airplanes, in the fighters. Some others are in tanks, and some others in artilleries. So if there is a principle which everyone would agree with is in conventional arms negotiation, that principle is the balance of forces should not be changed. So we cannot agree with any sort of agreement, deal, which would limit our capabilities without limiting the capabilities of the others. And here it should be done at the regional level. Missile negotiation and discussion should be done at the regional level. All regional countries should participate. In fact, Germany holds several meetings for about 8 years, which major regional countries participated about the missiles. Interestingly, Bob, Uzi Rabin, who is the founder of Israeli missile program, basically agreed with it. He said that there is not difference between a missile and an airplane. And he had a number of pictures showing that how they are related, how they are similar, and they cannot be separated. And the position of Israelis were not fundamentally different from position of the Iranians in those talks. Thus, I guess the missile program is far easier to address at the regional level, and I guess it's a doable, provided it is within the framework of conventional arms negotiation with that principle which I mentioned.
Okay. What do you think, Mr. Einhorn, in regard to what Dr. Hadian said, and initiating a regional mechanism to control missile capabilities of all the countries in the region?
Not just missiles, all the arms.
All the arms of the region, all the arms of all the states in the region.
Well, what Nasser is suggesting is a very complex negotiation. Way back, long ago, I was involved in what we call mutual and balanced force reduction negotiations in Europe. Yeah. And this is on conventional arms, and it was extremely complicated. It eventually arrived at an agreement, but the end of the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact made it impossible to sustain that arrangement today. But anyway, I recognize Nasser's arguments. Missile capabilities are an important element of Iran's regional self-defense, and it's concerned with a number of offensive systems by regional countries like Israel, as well as outside powers that affect Iranian security. So I think it's natural that Iran would want to seek, would want to pursue restraints on its missile program only in the context of some kind of regional arrangements which reduce the threat to Iran. But that's a long process. I would encourage it. I would encourage those kinds of regional discussions, but it's going to take a while. And there may be initial steps that could be taken, maybe on the, restrictions on the first use of offensive missiles against one another. Iran attacked Israel directly, I think, twice, and Israel retaliated for those strikes. I think I'm just thinking out loud now. I haven't given any thought to these ideas, but a kind of no first use of missiles capable of striking each other. Something like that might be considered before actual limitations or reductions of conventional arms capabilities. but certain understandings about the use of missiles against one another in the region could be contemplated. Again, this is not my area of expertise, and I think such arrangements could be studied. But correct me if I'm wrong, Nasser, but my understanding is that for a long time, Iran has a position. I think the supreme leader has reaffirmed this position that Iran doesn't need missile capabilities above a certain range.
2,000 kilometers.
What I'm recalling is something like the range of 2,000 kilometers. And Iranian officials, I think Shamkhani, when he was national security advisor, also kind of reaffirmed that there was no practical military need for systems above that range. Maybe between the U.S. And Iran, there could be some understandings or reaffirmations along those lines. Again, I'm only thinking out loud, but I do recognize that the prospects for productive negotiations on missile capabilities are going to be very difficult, and certainly, in my view, should not be included in a nuclear agreement. But there should be discussions about missile capabilities on the side.
I fully agree with you, and you are right. It is 2,000. You are right that
Would you repeat?
It is. You are right that it is 2,000 kilometers. That's a limited on range. That's what the Supreme Leader has said. But I also agree with you that we should separate that from the nuclear negotiation. Otherwise, that would make it very complicated. There should be under the UN auspices a sort of a negotiation in the region to see for conventional arms negotiation, not only missiles. We need to have, as you mentioned, we need to have everything on the table. That's more doable. Otherwise, Iran would not agree with the limitation. But as you mentioned, but of course, no first use is a good idea. That can be negotiated, and I guess that it has a good chance of being accepted.
Okay, thank you. And to wrap up the session, and as the last question, I would like to ask a question from both of you gentlemen. Mr. Einhorn, in general, are you optimistic or pessimistic to the current negotiations? And what do you think about the Witkoff/Araghchi duo? Do you think two sides would be able to solve all the accumulated challenges?
It would be foolish to be terribly optimistic about prospects for successful negotiations, given all the mistrust and other factors that exist. And we haven't discussed at great length the internal obstacles each leadership faces in moving forward with negotiations with the other side. But I think the conditions now may be more promising than they've been for quite some time. I think you have a president in the United States who apparently strongly would like to achieve a deal. He keeps saying over and over again, I have powerful sanctions. I prefer not to use them. I have the option of use of military force. I prefer not to do that. I hope this would be solved by diplomacy. I think that's an important factor in the current equation. And I think if President Trump and his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, genuinely wanted a deal, they are more politically able to overcome domestic resistance than a Democratic president. So I think that creates a basis for optimism. I think Iran is also undergoing a situation where it's facing economic difficulty. Its military capabilities have been degraded to a significant extent. Its proxies, its allies, non-state actor allies have been weakened. All of these things, I think, create a better atmosphere, a better context for potentially successful negotiations. So I'd be a fool to say that I'm confident that a deal is going to be reached, but I'm cautiously optimistic that success is attainable.
Okay, thank you. What do you think about that?
I fully agree with Bob that I'm cautiously optimistic too, but I would like to say that within Iran, also Araghchi, the foreign minister Araghchi, has been able to basically make a sort of a consensus about among major elites of society for what he's doing. And the hawks in Iran are in a very weak position. But I would like to address one more issue, and that's about the perception of Iran is weak. Yes, it is true that we have lost some of our regional allies, but militarily, although Israel claims that it has destroyed our important defensive capabilities, which I'm not sure. Of course, Iran would say the same thing about Israel, which I'm not sure about that one too. I don't like to take them at the face value, but our offensive deterrence still is in place. In other words, our missile capability is there. It can attack it. Just imagine that if we were able to fire 200 missiles to 3 important sites, which has been very, very, very much protected. And according to Israelis, 38, 39 of those missiles have hit the ground. So just imagine that if we fire 400 missiles in Tel Aviv, not in very much protected as those 3 military sites. What if we attack the American bases around us? So my point is, it is too costly for Iran. It is too costly for US. It is too costly for America, for Israelis. That's why it makes me cautiously optimistic that they all consider the alternative a far better scenario, the far better path of action, rather than engaging in a military confrontation.
Okay. Any comment you would like to add, Mr. Einhorn?
I agree with Nasser. Iran, I believe, has been weakened militarily, but that doesn't mean that Iran is without military options, as Nasser pointed out. Iran is a resilient society. It's a proud society. There are many Americans who believe that Iran, in its current weakened state, has to accept American terms for any deal. I think this is a misreading of the current situation. I think a Trump administration is in a good position to negotiate a sound agreement, but it's not in a position to dictate terms to Iran. And if the U.S. Goes back to the approach that was taken early in the first Trump administration, and Nasser will recall these 12 requirements the Secretary of State Pompeo laid out for a successful deal. If it goes back to that approach, Iran will resist and there won't be a deal. So I think the Trump administration has to be practical, realistic about what's achievable. I think it can achieve a lot. I think it might be able to do better than the JCPOA. but it has to recognize that Iran has options, and it's not going to submit to unrealistic goals like zero enrichment and so forth. But if both sides are realistic about what's achievable, then I think the view that I think Nasser and I share is that a deal is attainable.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Einhorn. I think at this time we should wrap up the session. Thank you, Dr. Hadian. Thank you, Mr. Einhorn, for your remarkable remarks, for your insightful remarks. And to wrap up and summarize all the points and remarks that two gentlemen mentioned during the discussion, I think that both believe that we should address the regional issue, the missile capabilities, Iran's missile capabilities, and also Iran's nuclear capabilities separately. And in regard to the nuclear dossier, in regard to Iran's nuclear dossier, I believe that both agree that in the current situation, in the current circumstances, we can use the JCPOA as a structure, but some of its measurements would not work for the new deal. And we have to initiate, we have to make new measurements. For example, Mr. Einhorn believed that this time US would agree with a much higher level of enrichment in Iran, and Dr. Hadian believed that the US should allow Iran to stock more enriched uranium in its territory. And I would like to add one more point regarding the philosophy of Azad institution. As an institution, we truly believed in the importance of dialogue, and we hope that we can help our audience, we can encourage our listeners to seek for diversity, to seek for dialogue. And I hope that we can have other discussions like that in the future. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for watching us, and thank you, Dr. Hadian, and thank you, Mr. Einhorn, for accepting our invitation. It was really a pleasure to have you both here. Thank you for your insightful remarks, and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was excellent to seeing you after so many years. I guess that's 5-6 years now.
The pleasure is mine, and I thank you. I thank our very skillful moderator, and the Assad Institution for this event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.